When we say things like work-life balance, we are implying that work is separate from life. We are queuing up, even visually in our minds, something that on one side is family and home and things that are supposed to be the most important thing in the world to you, heavy rock, and work, which is, the thing you do because you have to do it. And it can't necessarily be as important as that. Yet you spend all your time there, so balance those things. That's all we want you to do. And it's impossible. Impossible for starters because they are two such different things. They aren't even on the same planet. They're not comparable. So if you try and think of balancing those two things, this isn't going to work, right? It doesn't happen. So it's not about balance. So I banished the word balance from my lexicon years and years ago. And I think that there is still a tendency to look at people, and women particularly, who have this picture and this mix with the great big work career that may be see, even my words, I almost said at expense of the other things. And that's not the right words. Have that be the primary big ball that's in their hand at that time, perhaps more than some of the other things. We tend to think that that's probably not a good thing. And I want us to all fight that because it's very inherent. It's a bias that will be stronger or weaker depending on what you grew up with and what's been around you. But I think if we're all going to actually realize our full potential, we have to understand that the mix we choose is going to be right, and the mix you choose is going to be right, and you choose is going to be right, and there is not a wrong mix from an external point of view. I don't want anybody to think that they have to meet some balance objective that makes sense for somebody else. Figure out your goal, create the plan, work the plan, and make sure you know who can help you achieve the plan. Perseverance is blood, sweat, and tears, but actually figuring out what you want in the first place is probably the hardest thing. But the top part is all about knowing yourself. It's about knowing who you are, and it's about knowing what you need, and being really, really honest and frank with yourself, which is not actually that easy to do. I like to think about it as what gives you energy and what lights you up, though. It's actually a more powerful way if you really spend some time thinking about it and you walk through your days and you walk through your weeks thinking about what did I do today and where did I find the energy. Learn what it is that you love and then try and figure out how you can make more of that in your life. But when it gets to things like reputation and legacy, status and prestige, I actually find women have a really hard time with that because we have a really hard time saying, yes, title is important to me, because we think that it is better, and we're socialized for the most part to think it's better to work hard and reap the rewards of the work hard. That humility is more important than self-promotion. If anybody's read Sheryl Sandberg's Lean In, and hopefully everybody has because it's a really good book, when she talks about the idea of humility in the workplace and being afraid to toot your own horn and thinking if you just work really hard you're going to get the tiara, that was like 110% me, to the point where I actually, I remember a career conversation with my boss at the time, and I was starting again to be in a manager level role. It was a career conversation, and he said, so tell me, what do you really want out of your life and your career? And I said, well, Bill, you know me. I just like to work really hard, and I like to do good work. I would be just as happy being your admin assistant as anything else. Like, seriously, I said those words. And do you know what he said? He said, don't be ridiculous. And then he pointed and he said, you could do that job right there. And he pointed to the corner office. And I said, what, you mean for like a small company? He said, no, that job right there. And I had never felt allowed to think like that. And then he unleashed the beast, and I thought, okay, I'm getting that job. But to come to that point of realization that that was okay was incredibly freeing. And then I could say out loud, yes, I am ambitious. And status that way is important to me. And just knowing that you have these needs, you start to allow yourself to work on them and to go for it. And I put at the bottom, don't underestimate the power of purpose. The extent to which your needs or who you are is heavily tied to something with some kind of what you find as higher purpose, that is incredibly motivating. So if it's, I'm in the food industry and I feed people and that allows little children to grow up and reach their potential and this is the noblest thing that there is, if that's what gives you meaning, that's something that's incredibly powerful. And hang on to that and include that and shape it, because it will allow you to stay more focused and on task to achieve your objectives than not. But it hit me when my daughter was, I don't know, probably like 8, 9, 10 in those kinds of years. And I found myself saying, I don't need to, ... I work and then I come home. I don't need to do exercise because it's more important that I spend my time with my kids. Or I don't need to spend the time sketching and drawing and painting. I love that, but that's not important because it's more important that I'm there for my children. It's about them. And I found myself actually kind of giving up of myself, thinking that they were more important than I was. And we all know that if we're parents because you do that. But then I thought, okay, now Katie's going to grow up, and I'm thinking I want all of this for her so that she can grow up and be a woman and say, it's not about me, it's about you. And I don't want that for her. When I realized that, that's when I started changing a lot of my language to my daughter particularly, but to both of my kids. And instead of saying, no, that's okay, it doesn't matter about me, or when we're together just talking about what she's interested in, not talking about what I'm interested in, I wasn't being a whole person to her. And I actually thought if I want her to grow up to be a whole person, I have to show her what it looks like. And so I did. I started to tell her that I liked being at work, and I had a great time there, and I have friends there, and it's mentally challenging because I wanted her to think that that's an important part of who I am, and that when she grows up, she can have something outside of her family that's incredibly important to her too, if that's what she chooses. The perseverance bit, this is the blood, sweat, and the tears, and it's not easy. You get there bit by bit, but this is when you need to stick to it. Put 2 things at the bottom because these are very common ways that people get through the perseverance. So they find ways to integrate their family and their work and their hobbies and what gives them meaning in life and brings them together. Other people create boundaries, and that's what works for them. You have to figure out the things for you and work it. And if you do any kind of Googling on work-life balance, because they haven't banished the phrase yet, you'll find a lot of things like this. And I'm not saying that these things aren't helpful, because a lot of these things are helpful. What's important, I think, is that it's all about, again, being purposeful. And here it's about being purposeful with your time. The first bit, being purposeful about your identity, which I think is more important. Who you are, what you need, what you aspire to, set up that vision and the belief that you're entitled to get it. But then being purposeful about how you spend your time is the enabler to get there. Rather than those, I'd rather talk about this. Because I have found that what's going to make it hard for you to persevere isn't that you don't have the right prioritization or time management skills. It's going to be guilt. Guilt is an extremely powerful emotion, and we are incredibly prone to it. And when you are feeling threatened or afraid, like, I am afraid my children aren't going to love me anymore. I am afraid that my boss is going to get mad at me. I'm afraid that my coworkers are going to be pissed off because I had to leave early. I'm afraid. And unchecked, the anxiety level is going to go high, and you're going to make decisions purely based on guilt, if that's the overriding emotion that the fear is coming from. And then you're not going to do the things that may be the right things for you to do, because it's a very, very powerful emotion. What you can do, though, and this is what I've learned to do, and I'm still working on it, It's to manage the level that the red light goes off on. And you can, by recognizing the emotion, recognizing the feeling, debrief on it afterwards, to realize that it's not a valid, logical fear. Your children are still going to love you. Right? So you can then tame it. Do that enough and you practice it enough, you'll tame it down. And the Actively Speak support. Any difficult change in journey, you can probably only do if you get the right support. We need the people around us. We need to have active partnerships. And that's a very carefully chosen phrase there. True partnerships at home, with a spouse, with children, at work, with bosses, co-workers, in the community, with caregivers, neighbors, whatever your circle in your community is, you have to actually be able to say, this is what I need. Let's talk about what you need. How can we make sure that we both get as much as we both need? Finding role models helps too. And last but not least, the support. You have to support yourself. You actually have to give yourself a break. You have to find ways to replace guilt with positive emotions. Neuroscientists say this is how you make your brain happy, but it's very true. And I didn't make it up, but I can say that I've used a lot of these things to overcome the guilt and to keep my passion that, yeah, I did deserve to create the kind of life that I wanted. You deserve it. I came to the conclusion that I'm worth it. I know that you're worth it. Your kids are worth it. The women that come behind you are worth it. And that's what I wanted to share with you today.